What's up, and welcome to Nowstalgia End of Year. My name is Pat Sheehan, joined by my co-host Dave Martin Swagger. Dave, how you feeling about the year in music, dog?
Feeling all right. Feeling all right. Still got a lot of music. We were worried when the pandemic began that all planned rollouts would cease, and they did for a time, but they came back. No live shows to go to, but still felt like we got a lot of new music, like a normal year. So yeah, that was nice. One of
Yeah,
the relative positives of 2020.
yeah, and actually, it's interesting because whereas TV and movies, we probably won't know until the coming years how the pandemic and COVID impact how movies are made around them and just TV shows, and also how they inspire the stories that are told. Music, we kind of get that in real time. We've had quite a few albums that were written, made, and produced right in quarantine, right? And probably because of quarantine, and some of them might even be on our list. So, pretty interesting to see music kind of be the first beacon of how COVID impacts the culture of and the art that comes out of things. So, um, it's interesting. So when I was thinking about this year, I was thinking about it feels very distinctive. There's like a cutoff for me where April and on feels like a very separate piece, and then everything before feels almost like it happened like 2 years ago. In a way, it's very strange. Do you have that same feeling?
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, I mean, through March we got the last of those like planned rollouts, and then yeah, definitely changed, and it was pretty dry for anything big for a few months after that. No doubt about it. Um, I've just been wondering if COVID will have lasting effects on like studio experience and studio sessions. Because obviously, anything that came out this year, for the most part, was made remotely. Home recording stuff like that. Definitely not people hanging out in the studio all day. I assume artists still like doing that and obviously see a big benefit of being with the engineer, being with their producers and their collaborators. But will that come back as soon as possible? I'm sure that's already coming back in a certain sense in places like Atlanta, where there
Mhm.
seem to be less COVID rules. But that's one thing I'm keeping my eye on is just if home recording just becomes the complete norm.
Yeah, you saw artists like Taylor Swift, Fiona Apple, Charli XCX, who really turned their homes into their place of work. And Taylor Swift made a documentary all about this and kind of showing how she brought in people for it. And not that that's something that's a totally new concept. Many famous albums have come out of people going and isolating themselves in one place and kind of making that music together. But you're absolutely right. Like that, the whole concept of having a studio, having people coming in and out, having it be this own microcosm of ideas and energy might be shifting a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Are there any trends from this year for you that really stood out? Last year I think we talked about the emergence of K-pop as a really strong force in the industry, and that continued for sure. I mean, we saw BTS and Blackpink and some of these other Asian bands really starting to are continuing to make their mark. Grammys now, um,
In the
you
West
know,
specifically.
in the West specifically, right? YouTube numbers are just being broken. Records just being broken every time they drop a video. It's crazy.
Yeah, for sure. Along those lines, continuing like globalization of things like Afro beats from people like Burna Boy and reggaeton from folks like Bad Bunny. That kind of stuff is continuing to be more and more prevalent and accepted and successful in the mainstream music industry in the West specifically, and that's great to see. And talked about that before. We talked about Burna in particular, but that's awesome, and that'll continue for sure. Um, I mean, not that TikTok was invented in 2020, but it does seem like TikTok's effect on the music industry took on new life in 2020. Look at the Billboard chart for the Hot 100, look at the best-selling singles of 2020, and probably 95% of those songs are major TikTok hits. At least 95, probably, right? Like
Hmm.
it it's of a piece. It's one and the other. Like there, and you can look at like the songs that went number one, the songs that stayed at number one. There was a lot of number ones this year, which I think is partially to factor in, but hits are hits from TikTok. And it does seem like we know that TikTok drives consumption. And we've talked about how it's made careers for people like Flo Milli, for example. But I'll be curious to watch how uh, that continues, because like we've seen moments where artists clearly are shooting for TikTok success with the way the song, perhaps the way the song was written from the start, with something like 2C Slide from Drake, right? Or just
Hmm.
really obvious attempts to find success on TikTok with stuff like Justin Bieber's Yummy. Like we've seen a lot of that at this point. But uh, no matter your opinion on it, it is certainly not going to stop. It is not a fad. It is very much part of the industry, and you can look at how much it costs to promote your music on TikTok as any indication that it's just part of the game at this point.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things we've seen too is uh, music labels trying to promote older songs on TikTok to try to get a second life for them in some sense. Very interesting strategy.
Yeah, I mean, there's a Frank Sinatra TikTok account now from whoever owns that estate. It's like a little gross, but it's money to be made. I
Money to be
understand
made,
their reasoning anyway.
and anytime they can make money, they're gonna go for it. Um, we kind of mentioned this, but I think definitely music seemed to evolve and really capture different moments throughout the year. At the beginning of the year, we had the releases that were pretty normal, but then I do feel like we saw music evolving with the cultural shifts that were happening, whether it was albums that were talking more about isolation, about loneliness, about having to social distance from each other and sacrifice the places and spaces, as we all were forced to do this to for our own safety. We had albums that seemed to be capturing moments like the George Floyd protests and the Black Lives Matter protests. It really seemed like music uh, had its finger on the pulse this year of what things are going in, and it seems like the state of society had a major impact on very popular artists that were coming out. I'm sure we'll be talking about a few of them, but it's just feels like more than ever music was capturing moments, or maybe not more than ever, but more than ever recently has been capturing moments.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Any others, Dave, or do you want to jump into these album lists now?
I will note he did not make my list, but we did get more J Electronic albums in 2020 than stimulus checks, and that is uh, kind of a mind blowing proposition if you know anything about J Electronica's long road to the debut album, let alone the second album.
If you want to learn more, go subscribe. And if you want to subscribe and hear these lists when they come out and all the other lists, subscribe on youtube.com/nostalgiapod, soundcloud.com/nostalgiapod, and follow us at nostalgiapod on Twitter. All right, Dave, let's do it. 10 to 1 albums of the year. I'll let you go first.
Number 10 for me is 6ix9ine's Tattletales. No, just kidding.
I literally was just like, fuck. Oh, no.
Yeah, so 10 for me is an album that came out literally the week before quarantine began, the Saturday before everything went off the rails. And that would be Lil Uzi Vert's Eternal Take, an album long hyped and anticipated, released kind of disparately on a Saturday morning, and an album that stuck with me throughout the year. The first track, Baby Pluto, was my number one stream song of the year on Spotify as a result. And it's an album that is not without its faults, not without its fat and its skips, but without a question delivered on the hype that Uzi fans had bestowed upon it by delivering everything fans of Lil Uzi Vert come to expect, namely just that kind of unique energy he brings as a rapper. And yes, the beats might not be the most unique; it's still familiar trap beats and all that, but he just has a kind of cult of personality about him. And you think of songs like Baby Pluto, which is just straight energy, straight bangers. Myron, the same way. Prices, like there are tons of moments on Eternal Take that really stuck with me. And he even did something that we remarked on at the time. It's certainly not a trend, but it's interesting. A sequel song when he made P2, which was basically a flip of EXO Tour Life, his biggest song to date, one of his and his best song to date, and to try to flip that and use the same kind of production stylings and flow and update that with even more personal, focused lyrics, I think was really really cool to see from him. So yeah, Eternal Take, my number 10, and Uzi. I'm just happy he didn't stay retired. I wasn't worried about it, but I'm just happy this came out when it did because, you know, soon after, right after it came out, it was like, oh wait, when is new music ever going to happen again? And
Mm.
that was nice. So
Yeah,
got Uzi.
I remember listening to this album probably more than listening to any other album this year because I listened to it while running at the gym. There was like no one at the gym. People were keeping their distance. It was very strange because there was already word of
Right.
possible virus out there. P2, hearing that he was flipping his own hit song was just such a mind blowing moment on that album, and definitely one I'll never forget. It's an excellent choice for number 10. My number 10 is Waxahachie St. Cloud, album we talked about earlier in the year. Um, it's interesting. Kate Crutchfield has been someone that was um, really on my radar and someone that I liked a lot. There were a couple of songs by Waxahachie that I had on a couple different playlists. Out in the Storm from 2017 was an excellent album, but as I talked about in our review for it, Waxahachie had a knack for songwriting, but sometimes the tunes felt a little cold or distant, even though the rating was just so endearing and cutting. And St. Cloud totally reversed all those expectations. And um, you know, Kate on this album really infuses like the twang of country with a much warmer like country rock vibe to these songs, and it's just such a pleasurable listen start to finish. I wouldn't say that there's a song on here that like stands out as like, oh, that's an absolute banger of a song or one that I'm going to like tell everybody to go listen to. But just the album as a whole, as a concept of this, um, person who's really talking about life, and that's very vague, but it really does kind of expand across all these different aspects of life, love, and finding themselves going through hard times. Um, it just flows together so well, and especially like that first stretch of songs from Oxbow to Can't Do Much to Fire to Lilacs to the Eye. It's like pretty much perfect in my eyes, those first five. So I had a tough time picking the album I wanted to put number 10, but when I really put them all next to each other, I was like, St. Cloud is very deserving, and I want to give Waxahachie a shout out. So glad to have her on here. Dave, what's your number 9?
So my number 9, hold on. My number 9, it's Charlie Baby. When it comes to quarantine albums, you can't think of any album first, in my opinion, than Charlie's How I'm Feeling Now. Of course, we would soon get Taylor Swift's Folklore, which is the most famous and best-selling quarantine album of 2020. But How I'm Feeling Now, especially when it came out in, like, was it mid-May when it came out? Uh, Obviously, we were kind of starved for new music after the planned rollouts finished up in March. And hearing Charlie go through the process of making this and workshopping this over Zoom with various collaborators and even fans of hers, and approach an album less than a year after a really successful album last summer, 2019, you get an album that really, kind of spoke to the moment in May. And like Eternal Take, it's not that I love every song on How I'm Feeling Now. But I think someone who we've always lauded for songwriting, finding a way to bring uh, that feeling of isolation into her music, while also, I think, kind of, you think about Charlie from last year, production wise, that was a little more conventional, even though she's kind of been dabbling in that hyper pop stuff. But How I'm Feeling Now is, of course, really committed to the hyper pop stuff, which made sense, again, given when it was coming out, to kind of be out there because we were in an out there time. You think of a song like Anthems, which is, of course, produced by Dylan Brady from 100 Gex. Goes without saying when he's on the beat at this point. So yeah, I mean, Charlie, uh, I had her song Gone #1 last year, and I didn't have the album on the list last year. But this year, I feel like How I'm Feeling Now was just really momentous when it came out, and also just felt really singular. And it made sense that has come from someone like Charlie, whose artistry has long been lauded and always thought of as, kind of pushing boundaries. So it made sense that she would be the first one to drop a, significant quarantine album.
Yeah, this album rules in a lot of ways, and what I really love is like you talked about, she was able to incorporate a part of her identity and a part of something she was going through right into her music that maybe she hadn't been able to do as well, while still keeping her, the sound that fits for her and that's authentic to her. And even as you look at this album cover compared to a lot of her album covers in the past, like she is just so undone in this album cover, whereas like the one from the year before, she almost looks like this futuristic like princess in a way. So
Sure.
it's just cool how like she also collaborated with fans. It was going like back and forth with them about how to like make these songs kind of fit for a moment and for what they want to hear. It's just there's so many like cool details about it. It's such a good pick for a top 10 list. So um, great choice, Dave. One that didn't make my list, but certainly deserving. Number 9 for me is an album that we just talked about recently. We Will Always Love You by the Avalanches. The only electronic album that's going to be up here for me, but deserving because as we were talking about on the podcast when we reviewed it, there hasn't been an electronic album that's grabbed me in this way since Jamie XX back in 2016. And uh, In Color is one of my favorite albums of that decade. And there's a good chance that We Will Always Love You is going to be an album that sticks with me moving forward. It's a long album, and similar to what you're talking about with Uzi Vert, there are some skips. I don't think it's perfect in terms of you can't jump around, but I actually think when you think about EDM now, um, not many EDM artists ever make a album where you don't have a skip. I think it's just kind of the grab of trying to make that hit song. And what I love about this is there's a flow in between these songs, and the highs in these songs are incredibly high. One of the songs that you highlighted in our review that I found myself going back to a lot this week was Music Makes Me High. And it's just like a complete absolute banger sunshine of a song. It's just fantastic. And right before that is a Jamie XX produced song, Wherever You Go. A couple songs before that we have Mick Jones on the song We Go On, which it sounds something like a Gorillaz type song, kind of infused here. You go a few songs up, you got MGMT, Blood Orange, like all over. This is just hit after hit with
Mm.
great collaborations. And I think especially when the Avalanches first came back after their hiatus since 2000 when they dropped, or 1999 when they dropped Since I Left You, Wildflower was just such a massive disappointment. I think the expectations were so high for this band that had almost reached like mythical status after dropping such an incredible album. And We Will Always Love You feels like a return to form for the group, even though they aren't a trio anymore. They're just a duo. It really feels like they've gotten back to chopping up samples, stitching them together seamlessly, and just making really infectious EDM music. So uh, definitely one of the best albums of the year for me. A late edition. I'm glad we're recording this a little later, so we got to listen to this before we made the list. But uh, really, really one I recommend to everybody. Dave, moving on. Number 8 for you.
Cannot say pop and forget the smoke. I was thinking for a while how I wanted to put Pop Smoke on the list after the big 2020 he had, even in death. And I settled on picking an album, and then I actually struggled with which to pick. Meet the Woo 2, the last project he released in life, which was a classic Brooklyn drill mixtape. And then Shoot for the Stars, Aim for the Moon, the posthumous release that kind of catapulted him to a whole new stratosphere. And I went back and forth because Shoot for the Stars, Aim for the Moon is not higher on my list because I do think it's an album with noticeable flaws. There are a lot of features on here that I don't even think make sense. Um, and it felt a little cobbled together. But what you couldn't deny is that Pop Smoke's talent was certainly evident, but also his potential to be even more than he was evident, and that's why I ended up going with the posthumous record still. And not to spend too much time on this one, but it's kind of wild to me that the Pop Smoke posthumous album became like littered with TikTok hits. Like I never saw that coming in the least. But when you go back to that track list and you think about like the kind of out of nowhere like melodic songs he dropped on this, and you're like, wait a minute, like he's gonna like interpolate Genuine and Tamia and make these love songs like something special and what you know about love, while still bringing that uh, gloomy uh, Brooklyn drill, you know, growl that we've come to associate with him. Uh, it was still one of the most revelatory moments in hip hop to me. And I certainly went back to lots of these tracks. And, I mean, the 50 Cent comparisons were evident when he was still alive, but they certainly became undeniable on this project where you have songs like Gangstas, where he literally sounds like 50. And, songs like The Woo, where he has 50 Cent on the same song as him.
Mhm.
I think it was a really kind of a special moment again, even though I think it's a flawed project, and certainly reminds you of what a colossal loss he was, because he really had so much more to give and was just really starting to grow as a rapper. So Pop Smoke, he had a huge year. He's right now on Spotify. He's at like 39 million monthly listeners. That's insane. He was nowhere near this when he was alive, unfortunately.
R.I.P. Big, huge loss. Very sad, but solid pick for a top 10. And I think my number 8 is one that you might have somewhere on your list. And I'm wondering if you do. Alfredo from
Hmm.
Freddie Gibbs and Alchemist.
Hmm.
That on your list?
It is. I have Alfredo all the way to number 3.
Wow. Okay. So you wanna hold it and we'll get to it when we get there. Number
No, we
3.
can go now. That's fine. Let's go in.
So Alfredo. Very funny picture that has the background for this. Um, Alfredo, when we first put this on, I guess I was expecting this to be a solid album that I was like, you know what, this is really good, but not something that was great. And I think what made this great was not only do you get, I think, Freddie Gibbs sounding, I don't know if rejuvenate is the right word, but just maybe fresher than he's ever sounded from what I've listened to. But you have the Alchemist just like expertly stitching together this like mafioso old school hip hop record that just like makes you want to hit repeat the second it's over. And it feels so smooth and so part of a whole. It definitely has some high moments and some low moments for me. Scotty Beams is just a magnificent song.
You
I
love
think
those Ross features.
I do love those Ross features, but and I also really liked like Tyler jumping on the track with something to rap about.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Beat
even
sounds like the boat I didn't buy yet.
I mean, it's just there's just so many good moments in here that I had to have it on the list. But since you had it number 3, I want to give you some space to vamp about this.
No, I mean, I agree. I think for the Alchemist side of it, the sequencing is really choice. That it's a really tight project. And when you have it so tight like that with no fat, and your talent on the mic is Freddie Gibbs, who you know is going to bring you the bars and the personality, uh, it's just a great combo. And I mean, it makes sense because he's the one who's, he made Pinata with Madlib. Who would have thought he could do it again with another superstar producer? But here we are. And like you said, it has amazing features. Ross is great. Tyler is really good and really funny. And then, two of his, I think, contemporaries in this kind of lane of rap, two of the Griselda heavyweights, Benny the Butcher and Conway, who also dropped great albums this year. You have them on this, and it makes sense within the context of the album. And Gibbs somehow got Grammy nominated in the
Mhm.
old head field, that is best rap album for the 2021 Grammys. I certainly hope he wins. Um, I wasn't positive that would happen, but I mean now, I mean look at that, uh, and yeah, I think Gibbs. Sometimes it's just kind of simple. Like he's just kind of bringing you really tight bars,
Mhm.
and these are sick beats because they're from The Alchemist. They're always going to be sick. So, yeah, Alfredo, my favorite rap album of the year. Not the one I listen to the most, but the one I certainly appreciate and respect the most. That's why I had it so high.
Yeah, definitely. I think the rap album I was most impressed by for sure. So great combo. Maybe we'll see more from them in the future, maybe not. But Alfredo, definitely one of the best of the year. Dave, that brings us to your number 7.
Right. So for number 7 for me, we just had the most cinematic rap project of the year. That would be 21 Savage and Metro Boomin's Savage Mode 2,
Yeah.
which, man, when that came out, I had a great weekend when that came out in October. Um, Cinematic, I think, is the right word because Metro
Yep.
Boomin, who's a showy producer, really brings it on
Mhm.
this. There's moments where he's kind of dabbling in like Dr. Dre West Coast sensibilities with his piano keys and stuff. In general, he can kind of bring you that like spooky season production. He's done that with 21 already with Without Warning. But on this, it was great. Morgan Freeman trends on Twitter that Friday because it's not just like a one-off thing, but that to me, it was a very excellent use of album budget because you give like these really like metaphorical and whimsical uh, lines for Morgan Freeman to cite, and you throw them in at the end of your songs and intro of your other songs, and again, cinematic. And then of course 21, who just continues to uh, ride this upward trajectory as a top tier uh, rapper of the South. And I mean, there are just so many highlights on this that I constantly go back to. Uh, Songs where it's just him, like Sliding and Running and Brand New Draco and Glock on My Lap, but also moments where he's pairing off with someone like Mr. Right Now, which features, I
Yeah.
think, Drake's best feature of the year easily. And really one of the best Drake features in a while because it's Drake really at his best as a guest. And I was thinking about it a lot. And when it comes to Atlanta records of the past few years, I hold this right at the top alongside Young Thug, So Much Fun from last year, and Migos Culture One from early 2017. I'd say those are probably my favorite Atlanta albums of the last 3 years now. So 21, a few years back, I did not see this coming, but he's really damn good, and he makes catchy songs, he makes fun songs, but he also, you know, he raps a little bit too. He's more lyrical than people gave him credit for. And we've known this since I'm Greater Than I Was album. It's not like this is brand new, but to me, it was just, and like Alfredo in a sense, it's just an excellent union of producer and rapper. So Savage Mode 2, constantly going back.
Yeah, that was an honorable mention for me. Great album. We might be talking about it on the songs list, so uh,
Ooh,
we'll get to that then. My number 7, an album I doubt you have on yours, Dave, is "Gray" from Moses Sumney. Uh,
honorable mention for me.
and you know, this is an album I was coming back to a lot more earlier in the year. I think the second part dropped in May. It was dropped in two parts. I think the first one
Right.
was either late February or March. I can't remember. Um, but watching the Euphoria special, Rue, when
Yeah.
Me in 20 Years comes on, and it's really just Zendaya sitting there, like thinking about everything that Rue's going through and how Rue would want to be remembered and all these questions. That song just hit me, and I found myself coming back to this album. And man, I found so many of these songs to be so unique and moving and inspiring. And I really just feel like as we get further down my list, one of the themes I found was the artists that I'm picking, most of them make music that other artists aren't making as well right now. And I would say for Moses Sumney, I don't think there's any artists who are even really comparable to him. Like his peers are not in the same class because he makes this grand album following up a romanticism, which was maybe one of the best albums of that year. I don't think we even talked about it
We
if we
didn't.
did,
Really
but
good though.
just a fantastic listen. And this may not have the batting average of a romanticism. I think it's a lot longer, a lot more songs, trying a few more things, but the moments when it really hits, it hits. And uh, there's parts on both of the two parts that really stand out to me. But a couple of the song sequencing that really got to me was in the first one, starting off with Insula, which is funny that it came out prior to the pandemic, but now being a song about isolation feels like it could have been written for the pandemic in a lot of ways. Into In Bloom, Viral, and then into Conveyor, I thought was just a amazing sequencing of songs. And the second half, having Polly, Two Dogs, Bystanders, and Me in 20 Years is just like another great run like that. And I think the themes of growth and finding out that the world isn't black and white, but shades of gray. And that might sound corny for the title, being right in there, but really that seems to be kind of the central theme of this is that life as you go on is not something that's easy. It's something where you're making decisions that are going to feel shitty a lot of the time, and you're going to have these moments that leave you sad and lonely, but also happy and finding beautiful moments. And it's just beautiful moment after beautiful moment in this album. So, Gray by Moses Sumney. My number seven, Dave. That brings us to number six for you. What do we got?
Six for six for me would be Fiona Apple's "Fetch the Bolt Cutters," which I believe is also on your list.
Number five.
And it's an album that it definitely did not revisit a lot, but we were hearing it, I believe it was April, I want to say. And,
Mhm.
got a lot, tremendous critical response, a surprising lack of big top tier Grammy noms, but an album that obviously was a long time coming, in Fiona Apple's career, but can't help but just respect top tier songwriting. And that's exactly what this is. It's just masterclass in songwriting. And probably for me, my favorite song would be Shamika. But lyrically, Fiona, she gets into a lot of stuff, revisiting her past, talking about a lot of resonant ideas regarding stuff like Me Too, feminism, stuff like that. But in general, she's just kind of a badass that makes like really high level music. And you can't help but respect it, even if you don't listen to it all the time. And that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, Fiona has always kind of held this space in my mind where I'm like, yeah, I understand she's like one of the best people in music, but not someone that really resonates with me. I think, when you think about Criminal, that's probably the only song I come back to. And I really only came back to it recently after we saw the J Lo movie. I'm forgetting Hustlers.
Yeah.
So it's it's the sort of thing where it's like, okay, she's the goat, but not someone we're really going to come back to. But yeah, Fetch the Bolt Cutters feels not only like an album I think I might find myself coming back to more, but just, I mean, even just the title of this, you mentioned, talking about Me Too stuff, but for this to be an album that was released during quarantine, seems to be some of the songs seem to be inspired by it. Feels like it just proves how smart she is by having the title be have a double meaning like that, where it's like, you know, let women out of their chains, let them start to be considered equals in society to men, but also let us out of this fucking quarantine. Let us get out of our houses and go see the people we want to see. And just throughout, the songs are so creatively structured and brought together. A song like Relay has always really stood out to me about this album because you have her not only, I think, having one of her sharpest lines on the album in terms of the opening chorus, which was "Evil is a relay sport when the one who's burnt turns to pass the torch." Just like a absolutely like miraculous piece of songwriting, but then turning that into like having it put over and over and over while the sonics of the song grow, kind of like a relay, something that would just go around and around. In a sense, it's just beautifully crafted and definitely not one of the highlights of the album, but I think a lot of the songs have these unique structures, whether it's sounds or ways of kind of layering the instruments that just you don't hear in other artists. So, kind of going with that theme I was talking about before, this is a very singular album because I don't think there's anyone else that could have made this. And shout out to Fiona, glad to have her back. We'll see when we hear from her next. It might be another decade. Well, who knows? um, so number 6 for me, we're gonna stay talking women, Dave. We're gonna talk about Haim, Women in Music
Ooh.
Part 3. Um, similar to Waxahachie, which I mentioned earlier, I think this album from Haim felt like um, them showing us something that we hadn't really seen to this extent before. Like we'd heard songs like The Wire from them, which one of the best songs from that year and even from the last decade, probably a top 100 song. But then their next album kind of underwhelmed. Felt like maybe they weren't able to really recapture that magic. And then they get Rostam to come and produce with them, and it feels like they really struck gold with this because you have them taking their like bluesy rock sound, very like Lou Reed inspired, um, cool rock vibe, and putting these really catchy tunes around it, and you just find yourself going from song to song, singing along to the chorus, snapping your fingers, tapping your feet, bobbing your head. You really get into the album quickly. And, songs like Los Angeles or The Steps, Gasoline, um, Don't Wanna, I've Been Down, Summer Girls, like these are songs that like the second I hear them, I'm just like into it. And Haim, for a band that I was starting to write off a bit and say like they're probably going to be around, but I don't see them ever like leveling up. Really feel like they leveled up with this. So, um, just super exciting to listen to, and you really feel like you're like walking through like a hazy LA like afternoon listening to this. Really puts you in a time and place, which I appreciate. So, Haim's Women in Music Part 3, my number 6. Moving on to number 5 for you, Dave.
Number 5 for me is Run the Jewels 4 by Run the Jewels.
That
This
was my
on your
number
list.
4.
Number 4, perfect. Yeah, also, an album that was not recorded uh, mainly in 2020, but still found a way to come out at just the right time, dropping right as the George Floyd and Black Lives Matter protests were beginning in, was it early June? And you get nothing unexpected, I guess, from LP and Killer Mike, given that this is the 4th album in that sequence. But Mike in particular sounds really engaged, really inspired, and lyrically, the two of them once again are tackling a lot of things they've done before: institutional racism, uh, the evils of capitalism, lots of stuff, lots of ground they've tread before. But just this album, in how it related to 2020 when it came out, I think kind of rises above certainly the way RTJ3 landed when it came out, like right around Christmas time, for example.
Yeah.
Um, and you have a song like Walking in the Snow, which, again, not written about George Floyd, but very well could have been when you listen
Mhm.
to the song. So,
Eric Gardner inspired, I believe.
right. And we got another Zach De La Roca
Mhm.
collab on this as well, which is nice, of course, because the three of them made one of the biggest and best RTJ songs already before. So, yeah, I mean, it doesn't reinvent the wheel for RTJ, but RTJ as a prospect is already operating at such a high level that
Yeah.
to combine that with impeccable timing, even if it's unfortunately impeccable timing, it's tough to deny.
Yeah, it really is. And, as I'm like looking down the track list here, um, just so many of these songs bring a smile to my face. And, Walking in the Snow gets the highlight because it has the verse of the year from Killer Mike, probably. But I think a song like Just, that you mentioned with Zach De La Rocha and Pharrell, that that chorus, the writing for "Look at all these slave masters posing on your dollar," just feels like such an encapsulation of the one of the fundamental political divides in the country right now, and such a large piece of, I think, the election this year, and ongoing elections. But just it's just interesting that they're able to like capture these moments in such catchy ways. And even songs like "Ooh La La," which probably is the catchiest one to me, comes, it maybe doesn't get the same standing, but just kind of like sticks in your head, and so well crafted, right into a song like "Out of Sight," where you get like, I feel like, a pretty decent Two Chains feature. And shout out to Two Chains for continuing to be himself and just awesome every year. Um, yeah, there's really nothing to dislike. I even like the last one, which is a bit long, but "A Few Words from the Firing Squad" has a great like guitar like solo going in the background of it. It just kind of gives you that eerie like feel. Um, RTJ, like you said, operates at such a quality level. It's hard to ever uh, really knock them. It's pretty remarkable. So your number five was my number four, and your number six was my number five. So I think we're moving on to your number four, Dave.
Correct.
I have Fetched the Bolt Cutters at five.
Right. My number four would be Rina Sawayama, which
Hell yeah.
really surprised me. I had not been attuned to Rina coming into this year, but first starting with her 2017 EP Rena, which I absolutely adore and listen to a lot right now. I don't love Sawayama quite at that level, but it's still really, really strong because, like that EP, Rena's just presenting herself as this incredible genre blending talent. And not only is it genre blending, but it's also blending musical eras. When you can bring people back to like 2000s pop, but also manage to pull off like really sick guitar riffs while you're doing that, uh, you're gonna stand out. And Sawayama to me is, I think, an album that really rewards repeat listening. Less so because of lyrics like say "I Run the Jewels" or "Fiona Apple," but in Rena's case, it's really just the song ideas. And if you listen to Deluxe in particular, you'll hear even more of that, right? You could juxtapose, Como de Garçons with,
Yeah.
kind of the Blood Plot produced Lucid, for example. Like
Mhm.
there's so many different ideas on here, in between Como de Garçons, and Bad Friend, and STFU, XS. You're getting tons of really cool song ideas and sound ideas combined with, I think, Rena bringing a lot of introspective lyricism as well. Talking about how she's felt in the past objectified because she's Asian and things like that. There's when you can talk about that while still making a song that bangs, uh, I think that's quite
Really
notable.
impressive. Yeah.
Yeah,
And you mentioned like the 2000s pop sound that she brings, and it's not only that, but she brings back corn sound, basically. Like, she's
yeah,
basically bringing back
wild.
this like metal sound, and it somehow doesn't feel out of place. It just feels super genuine and in line with what she's trying to do. Is really impressive. So definitely a worthy choice for a top 10. It was one of my honorable mentions, so I'm glad it was on yours. Um, Dave, what was your number three?
That would be Freddie Gibbs, Alfredo. So what is
All
your
right.
number three?
My number three is Twice as Tall by Burna Boy.
Nice.
Um,
Honorable mention for me.
I remember driving to this and just feeling all types of different emotions listening to this because Burner Boy, you know, bringing his Afro beats, his reggaeton, his hip hop into this, infusing it so beautifully, also takes an album that is really introspective, looking at some of the low points of his career and his life, but then also making music that is just so triumphant
Yeah.
and um, makes you feel kind of like a superhero, which I think makes sense since Burner Boy's name came from a superhero he imagined himself as a kid. And oh man, just like going back and listening to all these songs is just like so joyous in so many ways. And you come back to a song like Onyeka, Baby, or Wonderful, and you can really get those like um, those. You can get that big smile, you get that like pep in your step, and then it comes to a song like um, I don't know, like Monsters You Made with Chris Martin, which take Chris Martin out of it, I think Burner Boy's part is still pretty solid.
Yeah. His most poignant lyrics are probably on that song.
It's just tough that Chris Martin is on the hook, and that just feels a bit strange. But Real Life with Stormzy, another one of those songs where you're a little more reflective and getting down into those feels. So uh, just really impressive album, and it's one that I hope is celebrated. Burna Boy is making some of the best music in Afrobeat, and this album is by far, it blew me away listening to it. So one I've recommended to a lot of people this year. Dave, number two.
Number two for me, an album that I highly anticipated and delivered on the hype for me, and I listened to really ever since it came out, would be Dua Lipa's Future Nostalgia, which managed to complete its album rollout. Probably the last album to do that in March, alongside another album we'll talk about in a second. But like these last two big hitters in March, coming right after Uzi dropped, were the last like vestiges of old label release plans for music, right? We think Haim and The Killers and Lady Gaga, Sam Smith, lots of delays soon followed. But Dua managed to get that album out when she wanted to, and actually it was a week earlier than she wanted to because there were some leaks. And going in, I had a lot of hype because I really loved that first album back in 2017. Had that on the list, of course. But then I also had really liked the turn she had made towards dance pop, and I was like, are we gonna get that full turn? Don't Start Now, the lead single from the end of 2019, certainly continued that. Just kind of a perfect dance pop track. And then you get Future Nostalgia, the album, and it turns out, yes, that is what Dua Lipa is going to do because she's really, really good at it. And not only is it dance pop, but it's disco pop.
Yeah, disco funk. It's so good.
The comparisons that had started to begin, Madonna, Olivia Newton-John, Gloria Gaynor, depending on the track, right? They made a lot of sense when you listen to Future Nostalgia because that kind of like 80s glitz is what she's delivering on. And I just think it's littered with bangers. Lots of different kinds of tracks. Like if you want to really like get like more of a Eurodance throwback vibe, you can listen to songs like Love Again or Hallucinate. I think Olivia Newton-John comp makes the most sense on a song like Physical. And then of course you have one of my favorite songs of the year, Levitating, on here, which, like Don't Start Now, I just kind of view as a flawless track. And kind of for the first time, songs like Good in Bed and Boys Will Be Boys at the end of this track list, you have Dua kind of getting more introspective and speaking of her kind of observations. And most of her music's pretty light, but I think it was nice to hear that as well. So yeah, Future Nostalgia, man, it just really delivered for me and stuck with me year round. So big fan.
So this was also my number two, which makes me feel like we probably have the same number one as well, which is good because I think it highlights that these are just albums that are undeniable. And you know, I think you actually spoke to it really well. But Future Nostalgia is funk pop bliss, pretty much start to finish. An album that until they added the baby levitating
Ugh.
verse had no skips, and you know, it's just listening to it from start to finish. It's just remarkable that she's. I mean, she's still really young and making music of this high quality, and it feels like we really are seeing that next like pop female superstar, which is just so exciting. So um, I'd recommend that if people want to get a bit more stripped down, check out the Tiny Desk that she did recently. The
Mhm.
aesthetic on that, just in general, is worth it. But it really, I think, highlights that even though these songs are light and fun and dancey, there's more to them. She also has a good song exploder episode if you listen to that podcast
Right.
about levitating. So worth
I
a
mean, even
listen.
going back to the first record, BBC Live Lounge, she did a "I Don't Give a Fuck" uh, a cappella on that with backing vocals from some other pop stars, and the talent's evident whether it's expertly produced or not. No doubt about it.
Well, Dave, I think our number one is both After Hours by The Weekend. Am I right?
Correct.
Fuck the Grammys, dog. Like that's really like all I wrote in my
Doesn't make
notes
any
here.
sense.
It doesn't. And you know the thing about this record is it's pretty much perfect, and it's you know the weekend had some ups and downs. I think he was the person who was kind of exploring and trying to like find the mix of his own authentic darkness in pop while trying to kind of level up in that commercial success, and then he did it with After Hours, you know. And
Right.
the aesthetic in general is really cool. I mean, just this like Vegas, like Fear and Loathing type vibe, mixed with him just like battered, broken, running around, doing ridiculous stuff exploding, and then you just get absolute fucking heaters throughout. It's just incredible. And you know, listening back through this recently, um, the stretch of like Scared to Live, Snow Child, Escape from LA, Heartless, Faith to Blinding Lights, I'm like, and then it goes right into your in your eyes, and I'm like, holy shit! Like these are like all songs that could vie for like top 10 lists in a lot of ways. Like,
Sure.
and to have those back to back, it's just amazing. Abel really was inspired with this. Um, it's just exciting because it feels like he is transcending to a new level for him, and I'm really excited to see what's next. What put it at number one for you?
It had to have been the line on Snow Child, "Futuristic sex, give her Philip K. Dick." Uh, no, if you think about the two albums or projects that preceded this, Starboy and My Dear Melancholy, this is kind of the distillation of those two projects, right? Starboy, him at his most pop
Yep.
focused, The Weeknd at his most, you know, centrist, I guess. My Dear Melancholy, The Weeknd at his darkest, his saddest, his most hedonistic. Combining those two things and not compromising on either one. After Hours is incredibly pop. And you can look at that, look at the success of all these tracks. Blinding Lights came out the end of last year and is the biggest song of 2020 anyway. Again, really perplexing Grammy nom because it's also great on top of being incredibly popular. Um, and as you went through that track list. There are just bangers after bangers on this. And kind of like Dua in a different sense, that 80s glitz is really present on this. And yeah, I couldn't help but be brought back to his appearance in Uncut Gems,
Hmm.
a few months beforehand, where, of course, when that's taking place, it's like much earlier, weekend, like Crew Love, Kissland era weekend.
Yep.
But the vibes of that movie and like Julia Fox's character's relationship with the weekend in it, like really brought me into After Hours in a funny way. And as I remarked at the time, would have loved Julia Fox to pop up in one of these videos. I thought that would have made a lot of sense, honestly. But either way, uh, you went through the tracks. There's just bangers. It's an album that I feel like you talk to people. A lot of people really love it, of course, but there's a lot of different favorite song choices on
Mhm.
this, and I think that just speaks to how deep it is.
What
Like
is your favorite
as a
one?
full body of work, it makes total sense. But you can take apart tons of songs on this and just listen to them one off because they're that good as well.
Yeah. What is your favorite track off it?
My favorite track will be talked about on the best songs of 2020 list coming up.
Ah,
So make sure you check that out at youtube.com/nostalgia
s-
nostalgiapod.
stay tuned. Yeah, there's two tracks that really stand out to me. In Your Eyes and Scared to Live. And Scared to Live has a Elton John interpolation in it, and I'm just like, yeah, when you're working on that level and like making it sound authentic and not totally cheesy, it's pretty awesome. So After Hours are number one. Dave, as we wrap this up, I just wanted to see, were there any albums we didn't mention that you wanted to just shout out real quick?
Uh, yeah, shout out Mac Miller's Circles,
Yeah.
which I thought was, it wasn't as revelatory as Pop Smoke's posthumous album, which kind of shed new light on what who Pop could have been. Circles made a lot of sense as a follow up to Swimming and a continuation of the journey Mac was on, but also really well done and deserves a lot of credit. And also shout out to Mine's album Limbo, which I really enjoyed, and I think is an underrated hip hop record for sure.
Yeah, you mentioned this one earlier, Folklore from Taylor Swift. I think it's the mention for me. Not my preferred type of Taylor, but the fact that I know more of those songs than I expected to at this point is probably just proof that these are still some of the best pop songs that were made this year. Um, Two more I just wanted to shout out real quick, which is Eve's Tumor, Heaven to a Tortured Mind, an album we didn't review on the pod, but I came to near the end of the year, and we'll be talking about some of those songs in a second. And then Destroyer, Have We Met Yet? This Destroyer is interesting. He's like this artist who it's very much in the same vein as the LCD Sound System, a bit more pared down, but just makes really interesting, eclectic, unique music. And have we met yet? It was just really pleasant to listen to. And that does it. Any last thoughts on the albums, Dave?
Did you have a biggest disappointment of 2020 album wise? I have one that sticks out like a sore thumb.
Hmm. I didn't write it down. Give me a second. Let me know yours.
Yeah, mine is Justin Bieber's Changes
Uh,
for sure. Another pre-pandemic album, funny enough. Yeah, I mean, coming 5 year wait nearly for the next Justin Bieber album. Long road in the public eye towards redemption for him. Seemingly, he seems to be in a great place in his personal life, but that album is just lifeless and lacks a lot of personality, despite trying to be quite introspective and personal. And even though it has like some technical by definition hit songs, there's really no hit on it, which is incredibly perplexing to say about Justin Bieber. And he's had success since that album with the Shawn Mendes song and the Chance song, but that album itself, I couldn't help but just be really put off by and quite disappointed in.
Yeah, mine is a much lesser artist than Justin Bieber, but after we really liked the best first album, the second album was just so
That's right.
so pared down and so bland. It's actually funny because I kind of forgot that they dropped an album until I started looking through, and I was like, oh yeah, that's right. One that was definitely forgettable. So hopefully the next one's a little better.